Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Bookman. Today I'm going to teach you how to factor, which is sort of like a puzzle. And so those of you who are really good at puzzles or have really good number sense are going to do really well and think this is kind of easy. Those of you who aren't so good at your multiplication might kind of struggle, but we are going to do this over 5 days. So hopefully after 5 days you really have a good understanding of factoring. And factoring is something that you need to be able to do for the rest of your math career, which is why we're going to spend so much time on it. So the first thing that I want to do is kind of review with you something that you were supposed to learn before spring break, which is multiplying. So when you multiply binomial, you basically double distribute. So if you would take a second and just kind of pause the video and see if you can double distribute both of these so that 2x goes to the x and the 2x goes to the 3, then go back and do 1 times x and 1 times 3. So go ahead and pause the video and get both of those done. It's going to be kind of important that you know how to multiply because what we're going to do is undo the multiplying. So pause the video now. So now that you've had a chance to do both of them, I'm going to display the answers for you. And I did it in both steps. Remember that after you multiply, you have to combine any like terms if there are any. And what happens is most of the time, the two terms in the middle, if you follow the right order, end up being added together or subtracted. So then the final answer for the first one was 2x squared plus 7x plus 3. And the second one was 3x squared plus 17x plus 10. So a little bit of background is we've done a lot so far with quadratics, and the first one was vertex form, which looks very familiar. So the next two kinds of forms are what we're going to be dealing with in these next couple of units. And the first one is factored form, which looks like this, and standard form. And so standard form of a quadratic is when something goes in order. You have the x squared, then the x, then the c. And so what we're going to have you do is we're going to have you go between both of these forms. They're kind of interchangeable. Okay, so what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you something that was already multiplied out, already in standard form, and factoring is putting it back into basically you're undoing the multiplying, you're undoing the distributing, but it becomes a puzzle. So today I'm going to give you problems like this, and you're going to be able to come up with what was in the parentheses. Okay, now some obvious things that I want to point out, which will help you in factoring, is notice this 2x squared kind of came from 2x and x. And similarly, this 3 came from a 3 times a 1. Okay, also, I'm going to change colors. This 3 at the end can be seen from 1 times 3. That's 3. And this 10 on the end is 2 times 5. The big thing I want to point out is what's not in this factored form is the middle term. And the middle term is everything because it tells you if you factored it correctly or not. Okay, so let's kind of get into an example. All right, so we're going to factor 2x squared plus 5x plus 2. Every single problem we give you today is everything's going to be positive, and then we'll slowly make it harder with some negatives. But for now, everything's going to be positive. So the first thing I want you to recognize is I have to look what's in the first spot and what's in the last spot, and I completely ignore the middle for right now. So I look at the first spot, and I think to myself, well, how could I multiply to get 2x squared? And the only way to multiply to get that would be a 2 times a 1. Now, it doesn't matter where you put the 2 and the 1. I always like to put the bigger number first and the smaller number second. So I'm going to put 2x here and 1x. And if I were to multiply that, I would get 2x squared. So that is checked. Then I look at the last term. And what's nice about 2 is, again, there's only one way to get 2. But it does matter where I put those numbers. Okay, so here, for example, I'm going to decide to put the 2 here and the 1 here. So this is called the guessing. I'm randomly guessing, but it's not totally random because I am using these numbers in my multiplication. And then I'm going to check to see if I get the middle term. So if I were to take this whole thing and double distribute it, 2x times x, 2x squared, 2x times 1, 2x, and then I go back through, 2 times 1, 2x, 2 times 1, 2. But if I were to combine the middle, I would end up only with a 4x and not a 5. So what you do is you guess, you check to see if you get the middle, and if you don't, you switch it. So I'm going to switch and try again. So now what happens is if I put the 1 first and the 2 second, then when I go to multiply, I get 2x times x, 2x squared. 2 times 2 is 4. Then I go back through 1 times x, 1, and 1 times 2, 2. And when I add the middle here, I do get 5. So the correct answer was 2x plus 1 and then x plus 2. It would be wrong if you put the 1 and the 2 in the other spot, which is what I'm kind of saying about a puzzle. Okay, so I'm using the original problems. I'm using the first term, I'm using the last term, and I'm guessing, but then I'm checking to see if I get the middle. Okay, let's try another one. So the answer is the factored form with the parentheses. That's the final answer. All right, here we go. X squared plus 7x plus 10. So I make 2 parentheses and I focus on the first spot. Since there's no number in front, it's really 1 times 1. So this is pretty easy to get the first spot, which is x and x. But unlike the last problem, I now have a 10, which actually means I have 2 different options. When I multiply to get 10, I could do 1 times 10, or I could do 2 times 5. So I always like to start with the smaller numbers, but you can kind of get good at these factoring problems by looking at the middle. But I'm going to start with the 2 times 5. So I'm going to put the 2 first and then the 5, and then I'm going to check. So if I were to multiply it out, I would get x squared. I'd get 5x and a 2x and a 10 at the end. And so if I add the middle together, I would in fact get 7x, which means I factored it right on the first term. If that didn't happen, then I would switch things and try again. But sometimes you get really lucky and you factor it right away. Let's try another one. All right, so this is the first one where we first taught you how to do GCF, which is greatest common factoring, because the first step to any factoring problem is to take out the GCF if there is one. If you don't, you actually haven't factored completely. So I'm going to check. I have a 6, a 28, and a 16. Those are all even numbers, which means it can be divided by 2. So if I were to take out a 2, what would be left is a 3x squared plus 14x plus 8. I divided each of these by 2. Okay, now when I go to factor, all I have to worry about is this inside part, which means it's way less options. Okay, so if I'm looking at the first spot, I want to get a 3, and the only way to get 3 is 3 and 1. Okay, and then if I'm looking at the end, well, I now have an 8 instead of a 16. I'm now looking at 8. So the only ways to get 8 are 1 and 8 and 2 and 4. And I would always suggest the lower numbers 2 and 4. But again, it does matter where I put them. So let's randomly guess. Let's put 2 and then 4 and see what happens. So if I were to multiply it out, I would get 12 and 2, which happens to be 14. And so I happened to get it right on the first try, so I'm done. But notice that that 2 that we took out at the beginning just kind of comes along for the ride. So you need to remember to put whatever you take out, your GCF, in front first. So this is the correct answer. Okay, one little secret for you is I'll show you on this problem, but you cannot factor cubes. This is a hint that there is a GCF in this problem. Each one of these actually has an extra x. And at the same time, I have a 4, a 22, and a 24. Those are all even, so I know I can divide by 2. But I'm going to divide by a 2 and an x. So if I divide 4x cubed by 2x, I end up with 2x squared. 22 divided by 2 is 11, and x squared divided by, take out an x, is x. 24 divided by x is 12, okay? Notice right in front, I have the 2x, okay? That needs to just come along for the ride because I should be able to multiply and get back to my original problem. Okay, so on this one, now I'm trying to get a 2 in front, so that's easy. The only way to get 2 is 2 and 1, okay? And I'm trying to get 12 at the end. Now 12 has 3 options. So really it's a guessing game. You decide, do you want 2 and 6 or do you want 3 and 4? It really doesn't matter what you try first. You just got to try something. So I decided to try 4 and 3. Now, the thing is, you don't have to multiply all 4 things every single time. And the reason is because you already know based on the first spot, you pick the 2 and the x. So you don't have to multiply the first 2, and you don't have to multiply the last 2 because you already know that's going to multiply to give you 12, which is why we made our list. So you can get by with just multiplying the loops is what I call it. But really the first and the first and last and the middle, that's all you need to multiply by to see if it's going to give you 11. Now you can multiply everything again, but I'm just trying to make it faster for you. Okay. So if we do that, 2 times 3 gives me 6. 4 times x gives me 4, and those added together will give me 10. And I'm looking for an 11, so I'm going to try again. So I'm going to decide to switch the 3 and the 4 and see what happens. So if I switch it, again, I'm not going to double distribute everything. I'm just simply going to 2 times 4, 8. 3 times x, 3x, and 8 and 3 is 11. And yes, that's what we're looking for. So the correct answer is 2x plus 3 and x plus 4. And notice there's a 2x right in front because that just kind of comes along for the ride. Okay? All right, last one. I'm going to have you pause the video here and see if you could do this one on your own. Okay? So you're looking for 5. How can you get 5 in the first spot? And then 24. So I'll give you a little hint. There are a lot of options for 24. You can have 1 and 24, you can have 2 and 12, you can have 3 and 8, you can have 4 and 6. And this is what I was talking about with your multiplication tables. Okay? Sometimes you'll know which one it is right away, and sometimes it'll take you a few tries. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video and see if you can figure it out, what goes in each spot. And then I'll show you the answer in a second. All right, hopefully you were able to do it. Correct answer is 5x plus 4 and x plus 6. So that is day 1 of factoring. Everything is positive. Hopefully you kind of get a better understanding, but you have to practice this. This is something that you have to try on your own. Factoring is in every single math class from here on out. Okay, tomorrow we're going to show you how to factor with some negatives, which gets a little bit more trickier. Thanks for watching.